Welcome, listeners, to another episode of the Untethering Shame podcast, where our job is to dismantle the hold shame has on our lives. As a fellow toddler mom, I am beyond excited to welcome Lindsay Mayer to the podcast today so we can talk about a super critical topic, the fear of losing yourself in motherhood and the constant off-kilter balancing act we find ourselves in just to make it to a space of okay at the end of each day. And while it isn't fair to say this is only a mom experience, we know that women are still disproportionately affected by the pressures of parenthood, household management, possibly work outside of the home, and playing that role of human giver, leaving ourselves last with a guarantee that we're pretty much never going to have the ability to serve ourselves, or in many cases, open ourselves up to be served and cared for by others. Now, I've had the chance to work and connect with Lindsay in so many ways over the years and can attest that she's someone who shows up and goes all in whatever she takes on. She's a marketing professional and has worked for over 7.5 years at American Family Insurance, where she began working with speakers like me as a Dream Bank curator, and now is thriving in an advertising role where she manages their brand ambassador program and advertising financials. And beyond her awesomeness in the workforce, Lindsay's also a mom to a toddler and has a second baby on the way. She's partnered, and honestly, just with these 3 roles, you can imagine the pressure is intense. There's this pull or an unspoken belief and expectation she, like so many moms, carry to have to be everything for all 3 of them, no matter the cost. What do they need? How can I be there? What's expected? What's TikTok and Instagram made me believe is the bar for being a good mom? And let's not forget that Lindsay is also a friend, a colleague, an employee, and just a person as a whole. She has her own needs and wants. And as someone living with chronic illness, even though she still finds herself in that space of me last, has to grapple with the fact that her body has needs that can't be ignored and that she has to factor into the equation no matter how much her shame bucks back in the process. But what does it say about you when you can't keep all the balls up in the air? What does it mean when your body becomes an inconvenience to playing these roles, or when you've conditioned yourself to believe that you aren't supposed to have needs? And when you do, it reinforces the idea that you're a burden or a hindrance. How do you deal with the sense of loss and incongruence when you can't do what's become expected of you at all times, or when you need to learn to be okay with a B or letting things go? Whether it's a result of illnesses and the body's need for boundaries and limitations, overcommitment and way too many yeses, or honestly, just burnout and exhaustion that comes from raising kids and the inability to ever turn off this role, it's hard. And the only way we can really make a change in the internal narratives that we hold is to have these conversations and take the shame out of needing to say no or the right to have a day off. Lindsay, I am so pumped. I've been pumped for weeks since you said yes to doing this interview. So welcome. I'm so excited that you're here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here too.
Okay. So I've been loving kind of using a grounding exercise. And I know that you have heard me speak in different capacities. You know that I like these pieces, but I'm curious just for you and I to center in on how we're feeling right now. So if you could use one word to describe how you feel mentally, emotionally, physically, whatever it is, what's one word that's coming up for you?
Hopeful right now. And I can expand on that if you'd like.
Yeah, please. Sure.
So I'm getting to the end of my first trimester here, and it's been pretty rough. That's probably a light way to put it. With my chronic illnesses, and then also just regular first trimester concerns and issues. And I feel like I'm starting to come out of that and having more energy to put elsewhere than just on like literally making it through the day.
Yeah. Or a minute in some cases where.
Yeah. So very hopeful.
Oh man. And was this a different experience than baby number 1 and your first trimester there? Was that also hard?
That was hard. It feels harder this time, but honestly, like you're in the moment right now. So that always feels harder. So I don't really know. It's a little different. So I think they're both challenging. And when I come out of this one, I'll forget about most of the hurdles. Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interest. I mean, there's that protective nature that the brain has mostly around kind of the actual childbirth experience, because that's why people are like, yeah, I'll do this very physically traumatic thing again. I'm good. But there's also just, I mean, time. It's been so much time. There's been so much learning and growing since you had your first kid that this is going to be different, but it's also your brain's not going to hold on to all those details and those memories. You might remember to having morning sickness or having sort of a scattered brain, but it feels different now. And the context is different. You're older, you have a little one that you're managing, you're in, the dynamics of doing this and doing this. I feel hesitant to say post-pandemic, like pre-post pandemic, maybe. I don't really know what stage we're in, but it's a very different experience. And there's a considerable amount of overwhelm in this part of the transition process in the world right now. So you're carrying so much while your body is doing this incredibly overwhelming thing and still has demands for you to take care of it. Like you said, with all of the different illnesses and the pull of growing a baby. I mean, that just feels like a lot.
Yeah, I can't rest as much as I did the first time around because I have a 3-year-old running around who, he's learning when I'm not feeling well and like activities we can still do together. But he's 3, so there's only so much I can share with him, and he grasps. So
yeah, and it's hard too because we come into those interactions. Most of the time that I get sick from Everly. So, but she is, I think it's a kid thing. I also just think I used to think I had a really high pain tolerance and like a discomfort tolerance. I really, really don't. So I am out and it feels really hard. And so she gets it a little bit because a lot of the times we have some overlap. Like she's got a day where she doesn't feel good, but she comes out of them so quickly. And because she's 3, their world is really designed to be centered on them. That's how their brain functions right now. And so they don't get it. Like, but mom, just get up and play with me. So you get the relief for a moment, but when you're coming into it internally, also feeling bad, feeling like I'm supposed to be able to play with my kid. I'm supposed to be able to handle this. We have such little time left where it's just him and I, where we don't have another kid that mom's going to be pulled to take care of. I don't want to waste that. So my guess is some projection in that too, of a lot of pressure for you of how you're supposed to be. And then when you can't do that, how do you integrate that reality with your expectation?
Yeah, that is spot on. It's been an ongoing like mental battle for me, knowing that we have kind of a finite amount of time where it's just us together and we're pals. Like we're buddies hanging out in the evening. I know it probably won't always be that way, but so when I'm not able to show up for him and I'm like, hey buddy, I need to lay down right now. It's heartbreaking. So then he's like, you don't feel well? And I'm like, no, I don't feel well. And like, he understands to a certain extent, but it's also like, I feel like I am dropping that ball. I'm letting him down, and my husband's great. But it takes us both to give him the attention he deserves. And I feel like in this first trimester, it's been really hard to show up for him consistently.
Yeah. Would you say that kind of pressure to, because I think, mom to mom, I recognize that same feeling of, I want to be the mom that she deserves to have in all interactions, which is not fair to ourselves or to her, because we're learning about what it means to parent our kids each day. And they're learning what it means to be our kids and to be in this world each day. But I notice that's super strong for me. And we both did the majority of our parenting with kid number 1 in the pandemic. So there's a lot there that we could probably unpack with an added layer of shame of, am I doing this well and all that. But would you say this is a part of your personality that you had before kids? Like expectation of, I need to be X, Y, Z. I need to handle it all. I need to do it all. I am the person that people need to be able to count on. And I have expectations of myself because I can handle it. I can do it. And it says something about me if I can't.
Yes. I feel like that's been as long as I can remember. I feel like I've had this urge to show up for all the people in my life because I care about them. And I feel like if I don't show up for them, that's showing them that I don't care as much as I should care. So that really drives everything I do. And it makes me really happy and excited in many ways, but it also drains me in a lot of ways. Even in my family, I'm a middle child between a younger brother and an older sister. And like they're further apart than each other. So like showing up for both of them and being that kind of communicator between them sometimes, not that they don't have a great relationship, but just because I am that middle child, and maybe that's just me believing that I need to do that and there's no real need for it. But it's definitely something that has driven me to be who I am throughout my life.
And it's probably like worked well because people love that. People love to have somebody in their life that can hold all their emotional burdens and make sense of things and that they can count on. I'm assuming you would be the person in the group project in middle school that you're like, I got it. Like I'll finish the diorama when other people aren't doing it, because that was how you sort of showed up and how you showed care. And so that's a really tricky thing too, because my guess is there is that part of you that I want people to count on me. It's a value to me that I show up and I do this. But I wish when I couldn't, it wasn't so hard to give myself love and grace in those moments. And I think that's that tipping point from it being a value and something we want to embody, but realizing the context changes. So the days we can't be with our kid, the ways that we want to, saying, I'm still giving 100%. It's just the context of 100% looks different. But we don't get that. We get shame telling us, this is what you're capable of doing. This is the expectation or the bar at all times. And when you can't do this, it's because you're not working hard enough. It's because you did something wrong. And I could imagine the experience. I had a lot of illnesses that were trauma related that would fall under the bucket of chronic illness, but were really connected to my mental health and things that I hadn't processed and gone through. And as I've done some really deep trauma work, they've either resolved or become more intermittent in my experience. But having gone through that, I also, there's sort of an invisible suffering and pain that the world sort of belittles too. So I can imagine for you, it's not only the pressure you have of yourself about how you have to show up, but you literally have physical needs in your body that make it so you have to make yourself a factor, that the dynamics in the world that we live in are such that it says, yeah, but that stuff's not really real and doesn't really matter in the same way. And like, again, you just kind of need to get over it because you're the inconvenience right now for not being able to manage this better.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's as simple things as like making sure I eat throughout the day when I am hungry, drinking enough water. I mean, there are plenty of other things, but just those simple things, I feel like everything else comes first, and then it's show up for myself when I have time, aka last. And with the chronic illness and like this first trimester, I cannot do that, or I will get sicker, and then I can't show up. So I've come to be able to talk a little more about that with people in my life and be more open to sharing, because people are receptive to that. They're not like, oh, you're feeling terrible, keep on going.
Even though we believe like, that's what they're going to say, they really don't.
Yeah. They're like, no, oh my gosh, take a break, take a step back. This isn't life altering. Like, we can handle this tomorrow.
Right.
But being able to have that conversation with them, then I feel like I'm still showing up, even though it's not quite where I want to be. So that's one way I found to kind of deal with it. I'm not going to say that I do that all the time, because I definitely don't. And I hide how I'm feeling a lot of the time to just push on through and put what needs to be done, or whoever needs help first. And I do enjoy that part of myself, but it's also frustrating then when I get to the end of the day and I'm like, oh my goodness, I do not feel well. And
Right.
now I'm not going to feel well tomorrow. And
Right.
everything's going to be a little harder.
Well, and then the sort of perpetual nature of it, because you wake up with the same mindset that you just need to power through and that people still have expectations and that to-do list is there. And maybe you didn't do it yesterday because you gave yourself just enough slack to now convince yourself that you need to make up for it. So there's this kind of feedback loop. What do you think is your biggest fear if you didn't hide? Like when you say, I still hide a lot of how I'm feeling or what do I need? What is that rooted to?
I think it's becoming a burden to somebody else. Like, I think that's really where it hits for me, because I feel like I can't be a burden to somebody else and show up for them or be there for them in that way, because it's probably not, but it feels like a scale, like you're tipping one way or the other. And if I need help, I'm no longer a helper to that person. And I like being the helper. And that's where I feel like I thrive.
Do you think there's some element of safety in that? Because when you're the helper, you sort of guarantee your role and value. Do you think it's any part of that of like, well, if I can be that role, I've secured my spot. But the instant I need help, I could be a burden. It could be overwhelming for them. That's where rejection could lie, whether that's not being fit for my job or not being seen as thriving in this role, or, somebody else not wanting to spend time with me because they think it's too much work to be around me. So I'm just going to hide that because I don't want to experience rejection. I would rather silence it, figure out how to deal with my predictable pain and suffering every day, but continue to be that person, because at least then they're still going to be there, even if I'm suffering.
Yeah, I think it's being left alone is really where it comes down to, that feeling that if I'm not being helpful to somebody else, I am not useful to them, and they'll walk away. And I can't recall like an instance where that's happened, so I don't know why that sits so strongly in everything I do.
Yeah.
But it really feels like if I am not useful to someone in the moment, then why am I here with them?
Right.
And that sounds like I'm thinking to myself like, oh gosh, that sounds terrible to say aloud, but I think that is where it comes from.
Oh, and I think, as you're saying it, and I'm doing the because I'm going, yeah, man, I still do this. I speak on this. I know this. I do all these things, and I'm still in that same place because and I don't know if it's the same for you, but it was never that. I didn't have this moment where it was like I had a need and then somebody was like, screw you, I don't want to be there for you. And like, there was no black and white moment of rejection. That's like, see, this is why you don't tell people what you need. But I think it's the micro instances where it's happened. And part of that is probably how we were raised, how we were conditioned, being women, maybe the dynamics within your family unit of how do we show up? What does that look like to talk about our emotional needs? How do we take care of things? I remember living with my aunt and uncle, and your negative, quote unquote, emotions were the inconvenience. And so she would always say, put a smile on your face, smile until you feel like smiling, sort of this like fake it till you make it idea. It was inconvenient for me to be upset about something else. And so you start to say, okay, maybe then I shouldn't have those things, because if they're feeling like it would be problematic or get in the way, somebody else probably would too. So you start to kind of think this, and then you have these moments where you do share with something with someone, and maybe not the full story, but a little bit. And then either you get so uncomfortable that you walk it back and you completely flip it back to the other person because you've told yourself this is too scary. Or likely you've had experiences where someone else doesn't know how to show up, and they aren't there for you the way that you need, or they do make it about them again, or, something happens, but we interpret that as the possibility of rejection. So we don't go further. And so I think you are speaking the language to so many people listening to this, because this is not a you thing. This is a very collective experience for sort of the human giver population. And I'm borrowing that term from the Nagoski twins who wrote the book Burnout, The Secrets to Unlocking the Stress Cycle. And I just think that term really encapsulates what it is, because it's this conditioning of the self to be in a role of service rather to be in a role of interdependence and interconnection. But the reality is relationships are incredibly inconvenient. You have to be willing to be inconvenient. Sometimes that's what it means. You know, I still recall like a few years ago, Jordan got a flat tire on his bike in the middle of rain out here in Portland, going to the hospital to work a shift, like during residency when he was doing, 80-hour weeks. I think he had to walk like a mile with a busted bike in the rain. And he texted me or called me. I can't remember what it was, but I was working on the other side of town, and it's like Beltline. So Lindsay's in the Madison area. So the Beltline, if anyone's from Madison or has gone to Madison before, like the kind of the main stretch of highway, like Beltline traffic, like it's stop and go for a while. But he's like, I'm going to need you to pick me up after work. And I hated my job at that time. I was super annoyed. I didn't feel good about all these other things. And I just remember being so frustrated because at that point, I think I had been giving to everybody else. And I don't know if you ever experienced this, but you give. And then you reach a breakout point where you're like, okay, screw all of you. Like I'm done. And I just need someone to show up for me. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I was so mean to him. I mean, I'm saying it with a smile now because of, I think probably a little bit of feeling uncomfortable knowing that I do. And I still do that. But it's like, the reality is my choice is either to not have a relationship with anyone, whether it's my kid, my husband, friends, whatever, or to recognize that in relationships, sometimes that means it's an inconvenience. I had to go pick him up. That sucked. That wasn't in the plan. Would I do it again? Absolutely. And hopefully I wouldn't complain as much this time. And then on the flip side, like 6 months later, when my car broke down on the way to work and somebody came from work to pick me up, and not only did they come pick me up, but they spent the entire afternoon after my shift helping me get a new battery, helping me get the car somewhere else it needed to go, doing all those things. And it's like, wait, that's what it means. That's what it means to be. I was so uncomfortable the whole day. But it's that idea that that's literally what relationships are. They are learning to say that you have needs, and so do they, and both can exist at the same time. But I think what you said that's so key is it feels like it's one or the other. Either they have a need and I'm showing up for it and I'm playing this role, or I'm letting them down and I'm not playing the role that they need or want or have come to expect, or that I've come to expect, because as soon as I need something, I am now taxing them, and I can probably already tell you why their life is so overwhelming and they don't deserve that.
Yeah. And I've seen the flip side of that too, where, like my dad comes to help me with an issue, and like, he loves doing that. I still feel terrible when I have to ask him for help. Right. But it brings us closer too. Like in any relationship, those moments bring you closer, whether it's you asking for help or them asking for help. That's how we grow in relationships, right? I mean, of course, the easy times are moments of growth too, but it really happens, I think, when you're showing up for that person, maybe not when you want to or when it's convenient, but it bonds you. It brings you closer.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, because other people want to feel needed too. Because that same like dopamine hit that we get when we're doing something and we show up for people, they want that too. That is also the human experience. Is it feels really good to show up for people. And now I guess the goal for you and I is, how do we let them? But I don't know if this has come up for you too, but one of the things that I am struggling with, I think now still to some degree, and probably will the rest of my life, is there's a lot of grief that comes when you become a parent, because I remember the moment I was talking to Jordan in the car and I said, I don't ever get the convenience of being selfish again. Like selfish, like I can just not set my alarm. I can go somewhere for a few hours and not have a thought of Everly in the back of my brain. I'm never going to get that again. And I didn't realize how nice that was to have that until I didn't have it anymore. And so there's a lot of grief that you don't get to be selfish in the same ways. But then there's also this, I think, realization of, who am I if I'm not taking care of people? I'm becoming more aware that this is too hard. I can't do this. I don't like that I'm the one everybody counts on, even though I keep doing it and I'm playing into the cycle. But I don't even know who I am or what I want, or if it's feasible for me to have it outside of these roles anyways. Does that ever happen to you?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like those moments before I had Marcus, I could go somewhere, do something, and like, yeah, sure, notify my husband, hey, I'll be back by this time. But there wasn't anything else and I'm not saying anything else, but there was no one that was counting on me to be home and put them to bed, or, be there in the morning. Like I took a work trip a couple weeks ago, and that was so hard for my son. So no, like before that, I'd take work trips and I'd be like, yeah, I'll be back, whenever. And, maybe do a few fun things while I'm there and then come back. And now it's like, get there, get back. But it's also this joy that I have for feeling this purpose. So it's both. It's like losing a part of myself that was an individual outside of being a mother, and now also loving this role most of the time, right? Yes, it gets to be a little too much at times, or, when I'm not feeling well, everything feels like more, or things going on in the world. And it's just, there's more to be mindful of about myself and where I am, what I'm doing, than there was before. And with that, you lose opportunities to go do something that's just, either mindless, like watching some shows for a while, or a hobby, and that loses some individuality. And especially when I was in that newborn phase with my son, I felt so lost as to who I was and who I was becoming. And it was almost like one identity, and it was being a mom and focusing in because he needed me constantly. But how do you find yourself back in all of that and kind of still feel that fulfillment within yourself?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's this weird place to be in, and it's hard because I do think there's more movement that moms are talking about this more, but there's still a gap in how those conversations are translating to kind of taking off the shame in it too, because it is, and for many reasons, you had to be sort of the primary person. I mean, you're carrying your kids, you are, if you're breastfeeding or just some of the things are pumping or any of that kind of stuff too, if you're the one that they're bonded to you in a different way. And so it is a lot. And it is this weird, like even now, like there's moments where if Ev is excited for my mother-in-law to come hang out with her because we've had a rough couple of days or whatever, I am like, need a break, but also feel so jealous if she's more excited to spend time with someone else than with me. And I hate that I'm the one that has to do everything. Not has to do everything. I hate that I'm the one that is often wanted for everything. But I also, and that's the control piece, that's the comfort piece of being the one that's chosen. Like I secretly get like a dopamine hit every time I'm the one she wants when she's crying for something. Like I want Jordan to feel equal in this, but I also don't. Like I also kind of like it. And so it is this really weird part, but there is this piece of you can embody motherhood and love it with every fiber of your being. And we'll get to what this means for you with baby number 2 coming, because this is going to be a new transition for you. But there is still you, Lindsay, a person that has needs and wants, that even if it's like when you start a relationship with someone and there's that phase where people often are like so consumed and in it, and they have to figure out how to come out of it. They have to figure out how to integrate that relationship into their life as a whole. But it is tricky with kids, and it's tricky with kids in the course of the pandemic, post-pandemic life, and what this means and what this looks like. And you're probably only just starting to get some answers to this being 3+ years in. And now there's baby number 2. And I don't want to project how I'm going to feel, but I want to be mindful of how I'm going to feel. And what do I need? And I don't have a second kid. I have no plans for a second kid. I am very confident now in my decision to not do that. But I could imagine if I were in that position, the hard part for me would be I already feel tapped. And I don't want both kids, but my second kid particularly to not get just as much as, in your case, Marcus is getting. And that's hard because you will do it. But there's a fear that you won't do it at the level that you want. And so then the pressure becomes, I have to remove more of me and my needs to make it accessible for them because they aren't my boss who could say, we'll handle this tomorrow. They are little tiny beings that count on me. Yeah. So I'm sitting with that. I'm watching your head nuts. I'm just going to pause because it feels heavy, but I don't know where to go with it necessarily.
Yeah. I mean, I knew I wanted to have a second kid for a while, and I had always envisioned myself having 2. But I am terrified, and my husband knows this because I've talked to him about this. Like, we need to prepare this, like financial stuff, like nursery, like everything, so that it's easier when it happens. And in reality, I know that's not how it works. Like you get through it in the moment. And yes, you can prepare in some ways, but there's a lot I'm not going to be able to prepare for. And I know my life as a second kid, like my parents showed up for me constantly. And so I have this in my head example of how I need to show up. My sister also has 2 kids, and like, she's one of my heroes. Like I think she just is a fantastic mother. And so I love having those role models, but it's also added pressure to make sure I am doing what they are doing or have done because I feel that's the right way to do it. And it's a lot of pressure, a lot to sit with. I've had some tears over it. Like, am I going to be able to do it? And I know deep down, like, yeah, I have the ability to care for 2, and, my husband's supportive and my family's supportive. So I have all of these things that also help hold me up through that process. But it doesn't make the unknown any less fearful. Yeah. So I'm terrified.
Well, and again, coming back to the pressure that you put on yourself for who you have to be, which can't be translated to your family, to your husband. And so that's nice that they're there, but there does still feel like there's this expectation on you.
Absolutely.
And you now are sort of recognizing, I have conditioned myself, been conditioned by the world around me, probably a mixture of both, to put myself last. And I know that that's going to be my automatic. That's going to be my go-to. That hasn't worked well to this point. Again, you get the dopamine hits, it feels good in moments, but there's a threshold point that it hasn't been helpful. And needing to calibrate a new normal for you to say, well, what does that look like? And what does that mean for me in the context of me as a full person? Whether that, again, is like a day that you have an illness flare up and you've got to take more time or you've got to take more breaks. Like you said, even just knowing when to eat, how to eat for your body in those moments when things are happening, you have to be able to do that, releasing yourself from all the pressures of what anybody thinks or feels about all that. And so now coming in with baby number 2, there's this knowing that you already don't have any left in the tank to pull from you. So you can't do that with baby number 2, but that's your go-to. So there's also this sort of anticipatory grief of, when I integrate this new reality, what am I going to have to let go of? And how do I make sure it's not the things that actually are really important to me, like the relationship with your husband, your relationship with yourself? What does that look like to find what 100% looks like in the context of this new design of your life. And that, again, you're aware of what will happen if you're not mindful of it. But the work to kind of mindfully approach it is really hard when you're also sort of inundated with the fear of all the things that you're expecting and want to happen.
Yeah. And it's going to be different than I expect, no matter how many times I sit here and try to envision it.
Yeah.
So that's the other part. It's putting high expectations on myself, and knowing what I envision for myself will not be the actual, no matter how hard I try.
Yeah.
But exactly what you said too, like, where do I pull from to make this happen? Because there's only so much. So I have to pull from somewhere. And what is that going to be? And that worries me too. It could be work. It could be some other relationships. I already feel like I'm not showing up for my friends where I want to be just because of being, having somebody dependent on me at night. And most of my friends are in a different season of life, if you will. That's not that they don't understand, but I also feel like I'm already letting some of them down. And so then what do I do?
Right. I wrote this blog post a few years ago about disappointment I wrote it for me. I mean, that's most of what I do is like, I'm trying to learn and then I'm sharing it, but it's about how truly what disappointment is a misalignment of priorities and expectations. But we experience disappointment through a lens of shame when we're not aware of that, or sort of reminding ourselves that disappointment is inevitable and okay. It's not anything about us or about the other person. And I think that's one of the things that's really tricky, is to be okay with either your projection of disappointment or actual disappointment that others may have, because your life circumstances are such that you can't do things in the ways that they might want you to. And then it's rewriting the idea that this actually is the way that you want them to be. So even let's think about a day where your body is really asking a lot of you. And I love that you're working to set boundaries and be honest with people now. I think the goal is also making sure you do that when you're not pregnant, because I think we can use pregnancy can become this nice way of saying the things that we want, but we kind of lean it on the baby a little bit of like, it's that, well, that's there. And people kind of respect that. So, I'm going to use that. Like, I can't take another appointment on this week. I used to do that with the therapy room. I'd be like, I really can't do that. Or I just got to the point where I didn't want to sit in this really uncomfortable chair after a while. So I just said, oh, it's the pregnancy. Like, I have to lay on the couch. So I laid down for therapy. Like, I'm laying down doing therapy with my patients sitting in the like very uncomfortable formal chair. But the reality was like that chair sucked and I just like didn't want to sit up anymore. And so I think for you, it's also, how do you lean into what you're doing and then take it with you after that fact too, of setting those things? And then where do you need to be more okay with not taking that disappointment on, if it's there or not, again, real or perceived, and then being excited. I do this a lot where I think my opposite side is running my own business. And I met with a sales coach yesterday and she was incredible, but she's like going through all this stuff that I know needs to happen. And that needs to, I know that I want it to happen, but I'm really overwhelmed by it. And I think there's still that like little bit of, you talk yourself out of being successful in the ways that you want to be, mixed with the shame of your ego telling you success only looks a certain way, and kind of the feeling of what if I fail? And there's all of that. And then Jordan and I will have these conversations and he's so supportive of wanting me to have what I want with my business. And the thing I had to sort of grapple with him, as I said, but what's interesting to me is I have to start to be okay putting the growth of my business in a spectrum that aligns with my values, because I'm aware that at the end of the day, if I have an hour that's free, I love running my business. I love 99.2% of what I do in my work. And I get excited to get up and do it. But I do know that at the end of the day, if I had a choice between picking time with Jordan and Everly or going and working, I would pick Jordan and Everly. And I have to grieve the fact that there's a choice there. I can't have both. And I'm not there yet. And I think that's one of the things I have to work on is I will carry shame if things aren't moving or advancing, or if I'm not, the friend that I want to be all the time and out hanging out with people or showing up all these places. But the reality is that isn't my value right now. It's a value, but it's not my top value right now. And I actually am choosing to want to be with my family. I am choosing to want to invest in putting our house together that we just bought. That's taking time away from pushing my business forward or being on the phone and catching up with a friend or taking on this other project. But it's not disappointment for me. It's good for me. And I have to learn to release that. I don't know how that's sitting with you, but that feels maybe like there's some translation for you in that journey too.
Yeah, I think that's probably where I really need to focus, is aligning the values with my time and letting go of the things that are not necessarily not values, but lower importance values, and knowing that that is a spectrum that can change over time. Because I have FOMO. I really do. Fear of missing out. It's always been a battle for me. And even things that I don't necessarily like, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's really exciting. I'd love to be there. It could be something like, oh yeah, that sounds cool, but I'd love to be around the people that are there.
Yeah.
And I need to work on that internally so that disappointment can settle a little easier for me. I don't think it's ever going to go away.
Right.
And, but letting it sit a little easier in the pit of my stomach or whatever, wherever it may be, and just being okay with it, working through it. And I mean, there's always going to be disappointment, as you said. Like it's a natural thing, and I find myself really digging into that hole more. Once I get disappointed, I'm like, oh, what else have I done that has been disappointing? And now, where is that person looking in at me, and how are they feeling? And that doesn't always do any good, because I can't do anything about it, or I don't want to, because another value is higher, and I'd rather focus over here, but still kind of grieving, letting go of that. It's tough.
It's super hard. And it is that idea. I mean, I see it. I don't know if Marcus does this, but Everly is like, I want to play this, and then let's play this, and let's play this. And then before I know it, she's got like 12 different things out, but we haven't played with any of them. They're just now on the floor. And I am having that little bit of like, let's put our stuff back. Just remind yourself the toys are meant to be played with. Like, it's okay. We'll pick them up in a little bit. But it's that part. And it's realizing, we have to teach our kids, you can't do everything all the time. We can't do it all in one day. And I think that's that piece of, and there is some of that pressure. And most of us have the shame of needing to be and do it all for everyone, not because we need to be. I mean, I used to think I wanted to be like Brene Brown. I don't. It's not fame. It's not wanting to be at the top and have everybody say you're the most amazing person. It's really rooted in the belief that if we aren't everything for everyone, we don't get to be in the same room. And so it really is about letting go of that and realizing, gosh, there's actually only a few people I really want to be in the room with for the rest of my life. And I need to work through some of those external pressures too of, what would it mean if I did give a B at work? What would it mean if I didn't? I'm flirting with the idea of taking the summer off with a few things that I've done so I can focus on some of these different sales things and kind of business revamping things I need to do. And I'm like, but some people count on those emails and those YouTube videos. It's like, you know what? They'll be fine. They'll be okay. It's okay to make a choice that's like, but this is what's expected. This is what you're supposed to do. I am literally married to someone who has to save lives for a living, and even he has to take a break. I'm not saving lives. Like maybe, sure, I'm saying something that helps them to work through something, to do something, but that self-inflated I'm going to let the whole world down. I'm going to do all these things. People are going to be so upset with me. I'm making myself too big of a character in everybody else's story at the expense of the role I'm playing in mine. And so I think it's you and I both being like, I can choose to have a value that I can live healthy, whatever that means for me and my body. And sometimes making a choice to be healthy in my body with what my body is asking for or needs from me to be okay might cause disappointment for other people, because how that looks and how I show up for them is different. But I get to make that choice. And that's me choosing my story, not worrying about theirs, because at the end of the day, I'm not that significant in their story. They'll be okay. They will be just fine if I don't do this thing because I'm choosing to take care of me.
Yeah. And they may appreciate you even more when you come back.
Yes, exactly. Or like you said before, they might be excited to see that you also have a need, or that you're taking care of yourself, or that you need something from them, even if it's their understanding, to give you that space to celebrate what you need.
Yeah. I mean, I know I appreciate that in others. Like and I don't question, somebody's got to take a step out of a meeting for whatever reason. Like, I don't question them, but in my head, I question myself, and I think others are questioning me, and that's inflating my whatever, my purpose within this world that moves on, even though I'm not where I want to be or even in the room. Right.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good point. And that one's sitting with me.
Yeah, I saw your face as I said it, and I'm like, yep, I think we just both got to our next step of the work. And it is, I mean, it's that iterative process of going through it, knowing that it's something we need to do, but still doing the other stuff that's not as helpful. Like, it is that, I think, sitting with the reality of, at some point, and Everly's now really into discussing big world things. I don't know how much she totally gets yet, but we've had deaths happen, and she's like, so I'm going to die someday. Yeah. And what does that mean? And you're going to die someday. And, she doesn't yet have the discomfort that we've been conditioned to have about these big topics and these things like that. Sure. But one of the things I think about when we're talking is, every time she brings that up, and I think about my life as a whole, and I think about sort of the, like, in the grand scheme of things, like, I matter and I'm important and I want to be good in this world. But also, like, my time is finite. And when I recenter it there, I'm able to hold on to this more. And I don't think it's healthy to just, spend your whole life thinking I'm going to die tomorrow, so this is how I'm going to function. But I think that reality again of, that happens to all of us. We all have a very finite amount of time, and that chase to constantly tell yourself you don't get to take a breath until ... You will never reach that. That marker will always move. And so what does that look like to allow the possibility that what we've been taught is wrong, and that you can actually be a good person, have an impact in the world, do the things that are important to you, and take care of yourself, and have a full life, and have laughter, and have joy, and not be in pain, and all of these things, because you can have it all in the context of how you choose to kind of build the scope of your life and functioning. Yeah. So let's kind of fast forward now. Let's say that you're listening to this. Baby number 2 is here. And you're in that chaos, you're in that place, you're in that overwhelm of, how am I going to do it? Who am I? How do I take a breath? What do you want that Lindsay to come back to? What do you want her to know when she's at that point? What do you want her to be able to hold on to?
I think it's taking a step back and looking at things on a greater scale across my life. That is helpful. And also just knowing and leaning into those values. Like, my first priority is my kids, and It always will be, at least until they're out of my household, and then maybe I'll have a slightly different priority. But I imagine they'll probably still be up there. But leaning into that, and I'd like to tell her, like, let some of that go. Let some of that feeling go. It's not serving you. It's not serving the people around you. The people around you also see when you're fulfilled and when you feel good about where things are at. And just living in that freedom of taking that step back and really, gratitude. Like there is something to be said for gratitude and taking that kind of high level look. What are all of the things that I'm so grateful for? And I already know what two of those things are going to be. It's going to be Marcus and baby number 2. And I think also going through one, that there's seasons in that. So that will help a little bit too. But to other moms out there and first time moms, I think also just knowing that it's natural to feel awful about it sometimes. And sitting in that and being okay with that and knowing you're going to come out of it it sucks, but it is helpful. It maybe makes it a smidge easier.
And I love that that's kind of where you're kind of letting listeners land on or kind of wrap up on it, because I do think it is that element of realizing, I mean, there are still days where I go, I don't know. I'm not sure parenting is everything out. And I want to be Everly's mom. I really, really do. But there are still days that you go, this is my life. And that's not just as a mom. That's in the choices that we've made and what we do professionally, what we do personally. If we had only said this, if we had done these things, did I want to do this? I'd be easier not to have, I say this from a state of privilege of having a partner who is here with me, but some days it's like, man, it would be easier not to have a partner, or it would be easier to be alone. It would be easier to go back and do employee level work where I just clock in, clock out. And there's truth to all of that. And I think sometimes giving yourself grace and space to recognize that we need to pity party a little bit. We need to validate that sometimes this sucks. It doesn't make you a bad person. It doesn't mean you aren't going to show up and be amazing. And I think what you described as the seasons, as the therapist in the room with people, particularly postpartum, I'll talk about trends versus moments, whether it's with their kids. One day is very different from 6 months of, let's say, maybe picky eating or something, and they're panicked that their kid's not eating, or their kid's got something going on, or their kid is struggling with some sort of behavioral thing. It's like, well, a day or a week is like not a lot, even a few weeks. Let's look at long-term trends. And I think that's true for us as moms too, is you're going to have that day. You're going to have that week. Sometimes It's going to be a month. Notice what that feels like and start to recognize that support is necessary and required, because you deserve to not feel alone in that. And that there's absolutely nothing about those feelings that are wrong or not justified or mean anything about you.
Yeah. And just knowing that it's other people's experience as well, somehow makes you feel a little bit better about it.
Yeah. Like you and I are both saying we will choose our kids over anything all day long. I am still sad that means that some of my other ambitions look different than I want them to. Yes. And there are still days that I don't want that to be my choice. It still is, but it's all of that. It's owning the complexity that is interpersonal relationships and life.
Yes.
I could talk to you for another 6 hours about this.
I know, same.
Yeah. I think post baby number 2, we're going to have a follow-up episode to be like, where are we at? How are we doing? What's that sort of integration of life? And then also recognizing babies and toddlers is very different from once they're school age, and what our life looks like during those times and what their life looks like. And so even thinking about how you and I transition sort of in that web of those things too. Thank you. Thank you for this.
Thank you.
Yeah, Ben, I mean, I feel, well, I guess, I want to end on the same way we started, just thinking about kind of our one word to describe how we feel. And I think for me, I feel this kind of vibrational calm. Like I have this energy about maybe a renewed sense of peace, about realizing I am not letting my family down. I am not letting other people down. I am not a failure. I'm not a unsolid and capable business owner because this is how I'm designing my life. I'm choosing and have worked really hard to get to a point where I can design my life this way. And I think this conversation is really helping me feel a little bit recentered in that.
Yeah. I mean, same. I started on hopeful, and I will stick to that. I think grounding myself in some of this conversation, like I have these conversations not at this depth, but in my head, right? And it's hard to get out of the cycle that happens in there.
Yeah.
And so this has been really helpful to just remind me that this is all natural, and how it, how other people experience things too, whether differences, of course, but thank you.
Well, everyone, I am so excited you got to listen to our exploration, and for other moms, other caregivers, other parents, just remember that this is an iterative process, ups, downs, everything in between. You are doing amazing. You are doing whatever your 100% is in that moment, and that is already enough. And I am so excited to see you all back here next Sunday for another episode.